Over the years, military technology has continued to evolve, with top players like the United States, Russia, and China at the forefront of this evolution. However, in recent times, the United States has once again rocked the world by introducing its $150 million drone, the SR-72, son of Blackbird. Following the display of this aerial maverick in the United States, China has especially been looking to rival this potential aerial dominance. How intimidating is the SR-72 for other top nations? Is there a chance that it sparks a global arms race? Join us as we discuss China's fear of the United States' new spy drone. Since time immemorial, aerial warfare has always been about wit, intelligence, and courage. However, as time unfolds with glimpses into the future of warfare, a bigger win percentage is attributed to those who can control the skies. This is where the United States has thrived, with the explicit creation of amazing aircraft built for war. Although the United States has been at the forefront of this arms race, leading the pack with immaculate inventions like the F-22 Raptor, the B-2 Spirit, and the SR-71 Blackbird, other countries like Germany, the Kremlin, and the kings of the Indo-Pacific region, China, have postured as a viable threat to the sustained aerial dominance of the United States. While these countries have sometimes successfully matched up to the level of mental acuity required to be at the top of the summit in aerial warfare, the United States is now teasing the release of a drone that takes intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions, popularly called the ISR missions, to the next level, leaving everyone behind. The popular intelligence coming from the front desk news in the United States describes this new drone as an upgraded variation of the SR-71 Blackbird. The world of military defense has speculated about the existence of this project for many years, but the United States, being a hub of secret missions and national intelligence, has shut down the speculation with reckless abandon, keeping the world in the dark about their next military move. However, the SR-72 son of Blackbird seems to be teetering on the precipice of being announced to the world in 2025, as the United States reportedly prepares to unveil this aerial beast at an aerospace air show to send a message of strength to the rest of the world. Knowing fully well the dangers that come with being at the bottom of the food chain as far as air power is concerned, the People's Republic of China has reportedly shown serious concern towards the continuous upscaling of the United States' aerial stature. Although the United States continues to hide its hands, keeping certain information about this new drone away from the public, rumors of leaked images that have successfully landed right on the laps of countries in Europe and Asia seem not to go away. Ergo, China especially, which is reportedly panicking at the situation, has been rumored to step up its aerial combat technology, hoping to rival the potential dominance of the United States. With the continuous heralding of leaked images serenading the internet, it has become almost impossible for rival nations to avoid the elephant in the room. However, to fully understand why other nations are afraid of the mere concept of the SR-72 son of Blackbird, let alone its existence, we must discuss its predecessor, the SR-71 Blackbird. As far as building aircraft is concerned, the United States boasts some of the best aircraft builders in the world, especially with companies like Boeing and Lockheed Martin. In the late 50s, the United States used to make do with the reconnaissance aircraft U-2, which was designed for purely reconnaissance missions for the Central Intelligence Agency, popularly called the CIA. However, in the late 1950s, the Central Intelligence Agency discovered a need for an undetectable spy plane, leading them once again to Lockheed Martin, a company known for its superb aerospace designs mainly for military and government use. The project was codenamed Archangel and led by Kelly Johnson, the head of Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works division in California. The Archangel project was the birth of mind-boggling aircraft that could avoid radar detection, and Lockheed's Skunk Works division finally came up with the A-10 in 1958. However, it just wasn't good enough for the Central Intelligence Agency. The shape was deemed way too susceptible to early radar detectors. Ergo, it needed to be modified. The Skunk Works division took on the challenge and remodeled their masterpiece into the A-12 Oxcart, which was a less radar-reflective version of the A-10. Following the success of the remodeled A-10, the Central Intelligence Agency approved a $90 million project to build a dozen of the A-12s in February 1960. However, it wasn't long before radar technology was improved, making the A-12 almost useless after about 20 years. And just like that, necessity beckons again to the Central Intelligence Agency, which then calls out to Lockheed Martin in hopes of a new spy plane that combats the latest aerial defenses at the time. The A-12 had become an easy target for what passed as the new radar technology at the time. Ergo, it was easily taken out by aerial defenses, which included surface-to-air missiles, or SAM, in military parlance. Immediately, the Central Intelligence Agency figured out the need for an upgrade. The project's budget was cut, ergo its cancellation, which was announced on December 28, 1966. In 1962, the United States Air Force ordered a variant of the A-12, which they designated as the YF-12. The latter, which was used in the Air Force, had more fighter interceptor missions, unlike the original A-12s, which were used for reconnaissance missions. However, as the years passed by, the A-12 versions were remodeled into the SR-71 Blackbird, a monster manned reconnaissance aircraft that is nigh invisible to most anti-aircraft technology. The former version of the A-12 and other A-series in the Archangel project were completely different from the SR-71 Blackbird in so many facets. For some context, the SR-71 was built with tandem cockpits, meaning that the crew sits right behind each other rather than in the usual side-to-side designs. The crew comprises a pilot and a reconnaissance systems officer who navigated and operated the surveillance systems. It was extremely important for the pilot and the reconnaissance systems officer, or RSO, to work in tandem to secure the safety of the flight. Owing to the demands of the United States Air Force, Lockheed made sure that the aircraft had the smallest radar cross-section that they could achieve at the time, kicking off an early attempt at stealth. However, since the aircraft was designed mainly for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or ISR missions as they are popularly called, Lockheed figured that they needed more than a small radar cross-section. Ergo, they took other precautions. For some context, the SR-71 was painted jet black for two reasons. First, it made it super difficult to detect in the sky, especially at night. Think of it like being dressed all in black at night while playing a hide-and-seek game. It was the perfect condition for a person to never get noticed. Furthermore, aside from the black paint making it difficult for the radar technology, it also radiates the heat from the surface of the aircraft better than the bare metal designs that have been used in the past. With the help of the jet black paint, the heat coming from the friction that comes with flying at Mach 3 is spread evenly across the body and is dissipated just as fast. Owing to this quick reaction to heat and how fast it cools off, the SR-71 was undetectable to thermal or infrared sensors, as its heat signature is nigh impossible to read because of how quickly it cools off. While it sounds like the perfect aircraft, it definitely had its own problems. For some context, the SR-71 Blackbird was built with 85% titanium, with the other 15% being polymer composite materials. But the question is, why build with hardware as expensive as titanium instead of bare metal? Titanium is fantastic for building an aircraft that will be traveling at supersonic speed, like the Blackbird, owing to its endurance for heat without getting bent out of shape. However, there was a small problem with building using titanium at the time. Lockheed found out that it was difficult to weld titanium and bend it into shape, but it was also a better fit because of its resistance to heat, while also being super difficult to wash. For example, it would be easier to wash bare metal with tap water, but titanium can only be washed with distilled water because it can be corroded by the presence of chlorine in tap water. Also, special tools were required to fit the pieces of titanium together, mainly because most tools at the time were plated with cadmium, which also causes corrosion in titanium. For the stated reasons, Lockheed had to develop new ways to not only fit the titanium into building the Blackbird, but also find new ways to make sure it suited the aerodynamics required to make it functional. Owing to the high temperature that is generated from the friction during flight at 3 times the speed of sound, the aircraft needed to be designed and operated specially. For some context, most aircraft have major sections of their skin completely smooth, but the case was different with the Blackbird. The Blackbird has major parts of the inboard wing skin corrugated, meaning that they are wrinkly. It seemed rather disturbing at the time because it broke every norm that was associated with building aircraft at the time. As expected, there were scientists, especially aerodynamicists, who believed that the design would have an adverse effect on the aircraft and likened it to a 1920s-era Ford trimotor aircraft. However, Lockheed, which had done enough research on the matter, chose to stick to its guns, and it paid off massively. While it sounded completely out of the box and basic, the rationale was quite simple. If the aircraft had followed the natural principles of design, which do not allow for corrugated body designs on an aircraft, the heat from flying at that speed would have split or curled the aircraft, causing potential damage in flight and possibly causing the aircraft to crash, leading to loss of lives, whereas having the skin corrugated gave it the opportunity to expand both horizontally and vertically when the heat inevitably came from the friction during flight, while increasing its longitudinal strength. While the aircraft seems to be solid on the outside, how does the crew cope with the heat from the exterior that just might seep into the interior? The Lockheed Skunk Works division created an outer windscreen of the cockpit that has 3 layers of really thick glass, making it resistant to the heat from the flight, which can reach up to almost 600 degrees Fahrenheit. However, owing to the lack of GPS at the time, the outer windscreen, which contained the Astro-Inertial Systems, or ANS, was also made of solid quartz crystals, which were capable of also handling the heat without shattering when the heat inevitably came during flight. The Astro-Inertial System, or ANS technology, remains one of the smartest inventions in the history of aircraft. It was the perfect combination of nature and science. The Astro-Inertial System, or ANS, was the guide for the crew, using the stars to judge the location of the aircraft, telling them exactly where they were. In fact, it was capable of leading the crew within 100 meters of its target. However, the burgeoning question is, how does one weld a material as hard as solid quartz to a titanium frame? The Lockheed engineers devised a smarter plan, using ultrasonic sound to fit both hard materials together. It was almost like vibrating 2 different pieces of hard metal together until they fused into one. The SR-71 was highly capable of stealth and reconnaissance. Hence, it was doing its job to perfection, but there was a small irony regarding how it was built. The aircraft, which was built during the Cold War, most definitely required a huge amount of titanium. However, there was only one new country with enough titanium to affect the build, and that country was the Soviet Union, the same one that the United States hoped to spy on with this spy plane. Hence, the United States used shell companies to secretly buy the titanium in bulk under the guise of commercial purposes, and then it was supplied to Lockheed Martin. Fun fact, the Soviet Union indirectly funded the spy plane that cost them the war. Following the success of the SR-71 and its use to spy on the Soviet Union and Communist China in the late 60s and early 70s, the rest of the world paid more attention to the growing aerial dominance that the United States was showing the world. China, which had tried to take down the Blackbird while it flew over Hanoi and Haiphong using more than 800 SA-2 missiles and failed terribly during the Vietnam War, decided to respond with a reconnaissance drone of its own that matched the Blackbird's reconnaissance capabilities and also its deep penetration capability. However, before they could come up with a penetrative, high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft like the SR-72 Blackbirds, the United States had already shut down the program in 1990. It was a difficult bargain trying to outdo an already closed program, but the People's Republic of China did not see it that way. Instead, they saw it as an opportunity to gain an advantage over the United States in the air. However, despite their continuous shot to create a reconnaissance aircraft that contends with the SR-71, they only came up with aircraft and drones that almost mirror the capability of the SR-71, but just do not match it. For some context, China released the CASC Rainbow CH-1, which made its first appearance in the year 2000. The aircraft is an unmanned aerial vehicle, otherwise called a UAV, that was capable of reconnaissance missions, meaning that it was designed to be a spy plane like the SR-71 Blackbird. However, the CH-1 was barely even scratching the surface of the marvel that the SR-71 Blackbird was. China, of course, was not oblivious to the fact, So they ramped up their research, hoping to catch up with the top countries, trying not to get left behind in the global arms race in search of aerial dominance. War specialists over the years have discussed the power of ruling the air as the biggest power that an opposition can have, as it ensured their superiority and their greatness over their opponent. Like Winston Churchill once said, "For good or for ill, air mastery is today the supreme expression of military power, and fleets and armies, however vital and important, must accept a subordinate rank." Air power has never been negotiable, and China knew it too, especially since they have been trying to take over Taiwan but have been stopped dead in their tracks by the United States at every turn. But while China has failed to match up to the once SR-71 Blackbird in the past, the future has started to appear a bit bleaker in Beijing with the ravaging news of the son of Blackbird, the $150 million drone, with superior reconnaissance capability in comparison with the SR-71 Blackbird. According to some reports, news of this new air maverick has sent shivers down the spine of the Indo-Pacific nation, who had until now distorted the power structures in Asia, with their continuous interest in expanding the Air Defense Identification Zone, otherwise called ADIZ, taking up zones that officially did not belong to them, but they are willing to fight Japan and the United States while advancing it to the East China Sea. China's Ministry of National Defense declared that it would begin enforcing its rules in its Air Defense Identification Zone at 10 a.m. on November 23, 2013. The rules demand that any aircraft flying in the Air Defense Identification Zone must report a flight plan to the Chinese government, maintain radio communication, and respond to identification inquiries from the Chinese government, maintain radar transponder function, and exhibit clear nationality and logo markings. And the announcement warned that China's armed forces will adopt defensive emergency measures to respond to aircraft that do not cooperate in the identification. While the warnings scared off a lot of the countries in the Indo-Pacific region that do not have the military might to contend with China's extensive military and war technology, the United States was there once again to prove its dominance as the superior state, which the Chinese government would think twice before crossing, owing to its military capabilities. To test that theory, President Washington ordered the deployment of 2 unarmed B-52 bombers on a training mission to fly right over the Air Defense Identification Zone that China cherished so much, challenging their authority right under their noses. However, China responded with a reverberating silence that echoed through the Indo-Pacific regions and the world as a whole. The world watched China squirm without so much as a bark at the United States, let alone a bite. However, while the People's Republic has continuously developed aircraft in a bid to match up to the United States' dominance, reports suggest that they are quaking in their boots as a response to the SR-72, son of Blackbird, which is supposed to be at least 2 times faster than the Blackbird, which operated at Mach 3 speed. The Lockheed Martin SR-72 is now being developed as a hypersonic unmanned reconnaissance drone, meaning that it could be sent beyond enemy lines without the fear of a soldier being captured and possibly tortured into giving up his country's plans, as was done during World War II. With this development, China is reportedly in a state of worry, foreboding the complete dominance the son of Blackbird could bring. Thanks for watching. While you are still here, click on the link on your screen to check out another of our videos. See you there.